Good afternoon, class. We're going to start in on the lecture on Chapter 3 in our books, which is Sensation, Perception, Psychology. And we'll start off by defining the difference and describing the difference between sensations and perceptions. Sensation is the taking in of a physical stimulus in our environment, such as light, sound, pressure, heat, or chemicals, such as taste and smell. And we're going to take those environmental stimulus and we're going to convert them into a neural impulse. So we've got to have a way for our body to change that physical stimulus into a neural impulse, communicate that with our brain, and have our brain turn around, process that information, and send it back out to our body so we can respond in a desirable or undesirable way. Perception is once we have taken in the physical stimulus and we've converted it to a neural impulse, kind of what we do with it, how we interpret it. That light, is it too bright? Do I need to close my eyes? Do I need to leave the room? Is that sound too loud? Do I need to cover my ears? Do I need to get away? And that's kind of our perception. That's what we do with the information once we have it. All right? We're going to do this in one of two ways. Okay? We have bottom-up processing and top-down processing. And there's a wonderful video in the class activity section. I want you guys to watch the video. It's only a couple of minutes long, about the rubber hand illusion. Okay, and this is the difference between bottom-up and top-down processing. It kind of bridges the gap between the two. So please watch that video. Bottom-up processing is basically the taking in of new stimulus. So think about an animal in the wild, and the animal has seen a new creature. The new creature this animal has never seen before. So you can see animals studying this creature and looking real hard at it, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. Is it big? Is it small? Is this a danger? That is bottom-up processing. It's taking in of new information. Top-down processing would be, once this animal has that information, do they interpret or perceive it as a danger? That is top-down processing. It's organizing and making a real-world determination on what they need to do with information once they have it. That is top-down processing. All right. The different sensory receptors we have in the body. We're going to talk about our five senses, which is sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste, and how these different stimuluses are graded. All right. And vision is, again, it's interpretation of light, detection and interpretation of light. Okay, so we're taking light, which is it's a naturally occurring physical stimulus. Our eyes take in the light and change that into a neural impulse, sends a signal, an electrical signal to our brain, and our brain interprets that and lets our body respond to it. Hearing. Sound is made by vibrations. Okay, these are particles in our environment that are banging against each other to produce vibrations, and that is how sound is transmitted. Okay, and our ear, and in your book you're going to read the different structures in the ear on how our ear detects vibrations, so I want you to go over that, and the process by which the physical stimulus of vibration is turned into a neural impulse. Touch, the detection of pressure. There's different sensory receptors we have in our skin that detect pressure and heat, and that transmits touch, the physical stimulus of pressure into touch, whether it's desirable or undesirable. Smell and taste are both produced by the detection of chemical stimuli, both smell and taste. Okay. All right. These are graded. When we're talking about grading sensory information, we're talking about our ability to detect differences in stimulus intensity. Again, whether a smell is overpowering, whether light is too bright, whether a taste is too much for our palate to handle. Okay? So when we're talking about grading intensity of sensory material, that's what we're talking about. All right. We're going to talk about thresholds here. Neurons, as you've read about in Chapter 2, and you should have listened to the videos, a neuron is like a gun, okay? A gun either fires or it doesn't. It just doesn't kind of fire. It either does or it doesn't. That's called the all or nothing principle. Neurons only fire at that one intensity. So since it only fires at one intensity, it does or does not fire. We have to measure the intensity of a stimulus in a different way. And how we measure the intensity of a stimulus is the repetition and the frequency with which these neurons fire. So if a neuron's not firing very quickly, it's a very low intensity of a stimulus, and that's how our brain interprets intensity. Okay? I do want you to read about absolute thresholds in your book. There's some charts in there that are going to do more justice since we're not doing face-to-face. I want you to read the chart in your book, and it talks about thresholds, I believe, in chapter 3 on page 89. Okay? Subliminal perception. Subliminal means kind of going undetected. It's not an active process. And when we're talking about subliminal perception, the body's going to continue to process information and react without you having to actively think about it. And we'll talk about subliminal perception like we've all fallen asleep on the couch and the TV's on, and we start to have a dream. And our dream is that we're in like a crime drama on TV, and you're trying to solve a murder, and there's a lot going on, and you wake up, and lo and behold, there is a crime drama on TV. Okay? Or you've been dreaming about you're a superhero, and you wake up, and there's, X-Men is on. That's because your brain is continuing to process stimulus even though you're not actively attending to it, and it still has to organize that information whether or not you're aware of it. You're actively aware of it. And it's got to interpret it and kind of merge it into your consciousness. And that's kind of like subliminal perception. All right, we're going to talk about selective attention for a minute, and anybody that has children is going to be well aware of this concept. Selective attention means I'm actively attending to a specific stimulus and I'm ignoring others. So let's say a child is sitting in front of the television set and they're watching their favorite cartoon. And mom is calling them from the kitchen and saying, Johnny, it's time for dinner. Johnny, it's time for dinner. And Johnny has like a horse with blinders on. He can't hear mom because he's actively attending to that particular stimulus. Okay? And he's ignoring his mom. Attention, even though it's selective, it is shiftable. Okay? Now when his mom says, Johnny, if you don't come to dinner, you can't stay over at Brian's house this weekend. That's something he cares about. So now he is choosing to ignore the TV. He's going to shift his attention to his mother, and now he's going to have a conversation with her. And when he's having his conversation with her, he is choosing to ignore the stimulus of the television. So when we talk about selective attention, that's what we're talking about. The ability to shift our attention and give our attention to one particular stimulus or two particular stimuli and ignore others. This is also known as the cocktail party effect. When you hear us talk about the cocktail party effect, think about walking into a cocktail party and there's a lot going on. There's so much stimulus that's happening in the environment. It's impossible to attend to all of it. Glasses clinking, music playing, a million different conversations going on, people dancing. There's maybe a speaker in the corner. There's probably posters or a slideshow. So we're having a conversation with somebody right in front of us, and that's what we're attending to. But all that other stimulus in the environment, all of those things I just mentioned are still going on. Your brain is still processing them subliminally, inattentively, okay? And that's where we're going to lead us into our next topic called inattentional blindness, okay? If we're pulling these words apart, inattentional, it's unintentional. I'm not trying to do this. And blindness refers to the fact that it's failure to detect unexpected stimulus when we're focusing on a task. This is also known as hypervigilance. When we're talking about hyper is too much, hypo is not enough. So hypervigilance. Vigilance means dedication to a task. So if I've got too much dedication to a task, that means that I'm reading a book and I become so immersed in this book and I'm so into it. My wife comes up to me and she starts talking to me, and she's literally this close to me, and she's talking to me, and I'm so focused on the book that I really honestly cannot even hear her next to me. That's called hypervigilance, also known as inattentional blindness. Okay? I cannot detect the stimulus next to me. I want you to be aware of perceptual sets. That's very important. Perceptual sets means it's our predisposition to perceive things or to view things through a certain lens or in a certain way. For example, if I was to say we're talking about a deck of cards, okay, and I start talking about hearts, one of the first things you're going to think about when I start talking about hearts, you're probably already thinking of it right now, is that they're red. Okay, but if I was to show you a deck of cards, and there is an example a wonderful example in your book here on page 94, you'll look at the perceptual set on the left, and it fits what you would think your description of a card would be. Spades are black, clubs are black, hearts are red, and diamonds are red. Then you shift your attention to the set on the right. And immediately you start recognizing, and I'll say, what's the second card in the set? And you'll say, it's an ace of hearts. And you'll say an ace of hearts, even though the heart, you'll notice, in the second perceptual set is black. You'll still recognize it and report it as an ace of hearts, even though that doesn't fit with the true description of what the card is, because your predisposition or your pre-exposure to a certain type of information leads you to believe that it's going to be consistent. Okay. We're going to talk about sensory adaptation. Adaptation, our body's ability to change and respond to environmental cues. So sensory adaptation is kind of like navigating in a dark room after the lights go out. Okay. It takes roughly about 30 seconds. This is a gross generalization, but about 30 seconds for the body in your eyes to respond, going from dark to light. You're sleeping, somebody flips on the lights and it's way too bright, and you cover your eyes, and it takes about 30 seconds for you to adapt, and you're back up normal where it's not kind of real stingy or really intense. And by the way, during that time, those neurons are really firing in very, very rapid succession. Again, that's how it lets you know that it's a very intense stimulus when we were talking about intensity earlier. Okay? When you're in light for a long time and you turn the lights off and you go into a dark room, you notice it takes you a lot longer. It takes roughly 2 to 2.5 minutes for your eyes to fully adjust to going from light to dark. Okay, and that all has to do with sensory adaptation. This is kind of that old example where if you put a frog in a hot plate, he'll jump right out. If you put a frog on a hot plate, and you gradually increase the temperature, he'll stay there until he cooks. Okay, it's because they have very poor sensory adaptation when it comes to things like that. Extrasensory perception, also known as ESP. I'm only giggling a little bit. I'm not making any judgment, but we're not going to talk about ESP from my personal viewpoint or your personal viewpoint, but we're going to talk about extrasensory perception from a scientific standpoint. And from a scientific standpoint, there's been a lot of research that's been done in ESP over the last 75 years or so. And there's really no evidence. There's been no evidence to support extrasensory perception. Somebody closing their eyes, and this is kind of the psychic thing. I see a little boy drowning in a river, and he's near a cornfield, and that kind of things. Really what you're asking the body to do in extrasensory perception is detect a physical stimulus such as light, sound, or an experience that the body has not had. And to a scientist, to a biologist, to a neurobiologist, none of this makes sense for the body to be able to interpret information that we haven't taken in. And that's what ESP really is. And again, there's no evidence to support that in 75 years of researching this particular topic. All right, we're going to move on to visual stimuli, and this is section 2, the visual system. I'm not going to go over the components of the eye. I want you to be familiar with those in the book. You'll certainly need those for your quiz and for the exams. But I want you to be aware of, again, a little bit more like what we talked about at the beginning of this lecture. The visual stimulus is the electromagnetic energy that is light. That's what light is. It's an electromagnetic energy. It's measured in wavelength. Okay, the distance between, if you're talking about waves, the distance between the peaks in a wave and the amplitude, the height of the wave. When we're talking about hue of light, we're talking about the color palette. Purity has to do with the same mixes of waves or different combinations of waves when we're talking about pure or impure colors. Saturation has to do with the richness or the intensity of light, okay, or different spectrums of light. When you hear the term pure colors have no white light. They're totally outside of the color tree, okay? I do want you to be aware of some of these things. Please review the structure of the eye, particularly things like I want you to be able to identify the cornea, the iris, the pupil, the lens. I want you to know what the vitreous humor is, the retina, sclera, fovea, and be able to identify the optic nerve, okay? And I want you to know specifically, I really want you to know about the retina. Please, we'll talk about rod and cones here in a minute. The optic nerve is the structure in the eye that transmits from the retina, and in the retina is what interprets the light and transmits it to a physical stimulus, and then transmits it through the optic nerve to the brain so we can interpret information. Okay, so the optic nerve is kind of that cord. You have the eyeball, and then, you know, if you've ever seen a very gross horror movie or really bad horror movie where the eye's sticking out of the socket, that's the optic nerve that's connecting the eye to the rest of the body there, if it's popped out of the head, unfortunately. Gross, I know. All right. So the retina is the light-sensitive surface in the back of the eye that transforms the light into a neural impulse. The pupil is it appears black, but it's really just the opening of the eye. So if you're talking about dilating a pupil, there's muscles on either side of the eye that open and close that controls the dilation in the eye. The cornea is the clear membrane in front of the eye. That's what bends the light. So as the light comes in, it kind of flips it over and shoots it back to the back of the retina. The lens is the fine-tuning element of the eye. It's a very transparent, very flexible disc where the cornea and the lens detect the light to the back of the eye. Problems occur when the lens loses the ability to flex, okay, which causes other disorders. The sclera is kind of the protective outer layer of the eye, and it helps the eye keep its shape and its structure. The fovea is a tiny area around the retina, it only contains cones. There's no rods in it. It contains cones, which detect color. That's a color perception, and that's the best vision area of the eye. It's the highest concentration and the best visual acuity is located in the fovea. When we're talking about rods and cones, which are the two structures that detect light, rods are sensitive to light. Okay, they work well in low light levels at night, and do help detect motion a lot better. Cones are your color perception. They respond to color and transmit our ability to detect color. Optic nerve we already talked about, and the iris. The iris is the colored part of the eye. Okay. We do have feature detectors in our eye, or structures that help with feature detectors, and really those help detect different types of stimuli, such as shapes, angles, sizes of different things. And the neurons fire when they're responding. Different neurons were fired when they're responding to different types of a particular feature, an angle, a shape, this different size of things. Parallel processing is an important concept to understand. This is the simultaneous processing, okay, processing that occurs at the same time of information in the sensory system when we're taking in information, which allows for faster processing and response times. So I've got, I close this eye and I've got a certain perceptual field here, and I close this eye and I switch eyes and I've got a different perceptual field in this eye. And in your book, you'll see that I want you to all try the blind spot feature, or the eye's blind spot test on page 100. It's the two peppers, the red pepper and the yellow pepper. Please read the instructions there, follow them, and you'll see that each eye has a blind spot. Because as we've talked about how the visual processing system is in the retina, which covers and coats the back of the eye, and light hits that, where the optic nerve comes into the eye, there's obviously there's no retina during that part, and that's the blind spot that we're talking about. The reason why we don't see a blind spot is because of parallel processing. This eye has a blind spot in it here, and this eye has a blind spot in it here, but because of parallel processing, where this blind spot is, I can see with this eye and vice versa. So our brain processes these two different images, which are different. You kind of do this number where you keep switching eyes and the image shifts a little bit. Okay, well, our brain is processing both of those images at the same time to give us a more accurate picture, a better 3D picture of our environment, and fills in the blanks. All right. Singular processing, if we were just used to use one eye, we're not as good at detecting shapes, color, movement, locations, 3D images, things like that. Okay. And you can read about the Ishihara test. I'm sure you guys have all seen the Ishihara test. The Ishihara test is the color bubble test. I believe there's a few Ishihara test samples, plates at the bottom of page 102. Okay. Please read about the trichromatic theory. The trichromatic theory is on page 102. And you'll need to know about the negative after images. That's kind of, I'm looking at an image and I close my eyes very quickly, and just for a few seconds it looks like a negative, a colorless vision of kind of an imprint of what was there before. All right. We're talking about shape, depth, motion, and consistency. We're talking about there's a lot of different perceptual tests that you're going to see that really kind of start right around page 100 and move through the end of the chapter, or at least that section. And they're going to talk about things like closure, proximity, similarity, and we're talking about the figure-ground relationship. But this is our ability to attend to stimuli that tend to stand out from the background. I think there's an example about the figure-ground. I believe it's the picture where it's got, like, it looks like the two faces. You can either see two faces, and this is on page 104, or you can see the chalice. If you're attending to the white portion of the picture, it looks like a cup or a chalice, or you can attend to the colored portion, and it looks like two faces that are looking at each other. There's Gestalt psychology. Gestalt psychology we're going to talk about when we get into the later chapters and the different approaches to psychology. But for now, you just need to know that Gestalt psychology is important because it emphasizes personal perception, my choices, my perceptions, how I see the world. Closure, you're going to see an example of closure at the bottom left of page 104. You'll see a triangle, a square, and it looks like a horse or a donkey there. But they're not. None of those three things are really there. It's not a triangle, it's not a square, and it's not a donkey. It's pieces. But it's pieces that kind of look like those things. But our mind closes those shapes off very quickly because they're familiar shapes, and that's what closure is. It's our ability to complete known or similar shapes or figures. All right? Depth perception. Depth perception is a critical concept to understand. We're talking about 3D perception. Okay, we're talking about binocular clues, bi, two. Ocular is two eyes. We use both eyes in the processing of disparate information. Again, disparate or different. I've got one perception with this eye. I've got another perception of this eye. My brain uses parallel processing to process both of those images into one image and gives me a very good, accurate 3D perception of whatever I'm looking at. Okay, we're going to talk about the process of convergence. Convergence is each eye focuses on a particular fixed object. So let's say I'm standing 50 yards away from my friend. Okay, if I close my eyes from far away and maintain the distance, I've got a different. If my friend starts walking towards me and I close one of my eyes, I'm not going to be able to detect how far he or she is as well or as accurately as if I'm using two eyes. I can determine depth, height, size a lot more accurately using the process of convergence as they come together. You'll also, as somebody walks towards you, or as you hold your finger in front of you, as you bring that closer to your eyes, you're going to see your eyes move closer together. Okay, and as you pull that finger further apart, you'll see your eyes start to widen a little bit. That's the process of convergence. All right, monocular clues or one eye. Again, we're not very good at determining things like overlapping, shading, height. We have to use our determination based on familiarity or known sizes of objects, rather than, which is using our memory rather than using existing physical stimulus that's in front of us. Okay, so monocular clues, we're not so great at determining new information or processing new information. All right, we're going to talk about motion and constancy. Apparent motion is the appearance that the physical environment is moving around you when it actually is not. It's like a stationary object that appears to be moving. I don't know if any of you have been in an IMAX theater, one of those big theaters that has screens all the way around you. You'll notice in those places they usually have a big handlebar in the middle of the room and will tell you, all right, we're going to go take you on a flight over the Alps or whatever it is, and please hold on to the rail. Because as you're watching this, the room is not moving, but your body will perceive that your body is in motion, and it will throw off your balance. Okay? This is also similar if you're inside of a boat and the boat starts moving around a lot. The room actually does not look like it's moving, even though it is. This is what causes seasickness. Seasickness is a confusion in your body between what your body perceives and what is actually happening. And if you're inside of a boat, you're actually your body feels the motion even though you don't see it. So one of the best things to do is actually go outside and look at the horizon. It kind of brings everything back into perspective. Okay? When we're talking about perceptual constancy, this is our ability to recognize that objects are unchanging, okay, even though sensory input is contrary, such as size, shape, color. Okay, so we know how large an item is even though it appears to be very small. Again, this is where I see my friend from 100 yards away, and it's kind of one of these deals. I can go, well, he's only that big. Well, that's how big he appears to be, even though I know when he's standing right next to me, he's 6 feet tall. Okay, that's perceptual constancy. Okay, and all of this comes together to means that we interpret sensory information. I don't just see my friend over there and I see him as 1 inch tall because he's so far away, he's 100 yards away, and he looks 1 inch tall, but I know he's really 6 feet tall. What this means is we're interpreting the information. We're not just, I see it, so I believe it. We have to take it in, we have to think about it. Okay? Think about how this can be useful. What I want you to start thinking about is how all this information can be useful when we're working with families, when we're working with family dysfunction, when we're working with things like substance abuse, depression, other mental health disorders such as schizophrenia. How this is important when you're talking about crime in the criminal justice system. Okay? We're going to go over sound very briefly. Sound, oddly enough, is taken in a similar process as it is to light. We measure it in wavelength, which means that's how we're grading the intensity. It's an interpretation of a frequency of sound. Sound, and your book is incorrect. There's a chart in your book in here that is not correct. Sound is, again, the collision and vibration of air molecules, The more dense a substance is, the better sound is transmitted because it's a more compact, you've got closer knit molecules. They bang against each other quickly and with more frequency and can transmit sound. Therefore, sound is transmitted through water better than air. Okay? That's why whales are able to communicate over vast distances. Okay, they're able many miles. Whales and dolphins and sea life are able to communicate using sound, where they could not do that if it was in the air. Air has much more sparsely, air molecules are much less dense than water, and that's why sound doesn't travel in space, because it's a vacuum. There's nothing to bang against each other out there to transmit sound. All right. When we're talking about the ear, we're talking about there's three structures: the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. The outer ear is located with the pinna, which is this, just the visible outer part of the ear. That really kind of acts like a little dish and collects sound and transmits it into the external auditory canal, which is just pretty much what you can touch with your finger in there. The middle ear and the outer ear are separated by what we call the tympanic membrane. The tympanic membrane is also known as the eardrum. The eardrum vibrates to respond to sound. Okay, when it vibrates the three middle ear bones, which is the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. And as the eardrum vibrates, it vibrates the little hammer, which taps on the anvil and the stirrup, and transmits sound into the inner ear. The inner ear has that little snail-looking thing, which is called the cochlea, and so what we call a basilar membrane, which vibrates to respond to different pitches. That little snail is filled with fluid. Okay, and fluid we've determined transmits sound very well. The semicircular canals, there's three little tubes that look like a kind of a distorted pretzel. Those are filled with a liquid as well, and they work together to be able to determine pitch of head, tilting of my head, and they kind of act like one of those little, you've seen like a bubble level almost. Hair cells. Hair cells are sensory receptors, and they're exactly what they sound like. They're called cilia, or fine bristled hairs that lie down against some of the structures in the inner ear. And as it vibrates, as sound vibrates, is vibrated through the ear, it vibrates these cilia, or these hair cells, which transmit sound into a physical stimulus, a neural impulse. Transmit the physical stimulus into a neural impulse. Where you have damage, a lot of damage that's done to hearing is damage is done to the cilia, where they are no longer flexible or responsive to sound. They just kind of lay flat and they don't vibrate. And if they don't vibrate, they can't transmit sound into a neural impulse, and we lose our ability to detect sound. This is where hearing impairment comes in oftentimes. Damage to any of these structures can impair hearing a great deal, which is where hearing aids come in. All right. Talking about body sensations now. We're talking about pressure, heat, pain, taste, smell, things like that. Pain is our body's warning that it's about to be damaged, or there's potential. It's warning of damage or potential damage to the body. It's a pretty good doctor. If you're feeling pain, that's kind of your body's way of telling you to stop doing something, and you would do well to listen to your body. All right. Thermoreceptors, thermo meaning heat, receptors meaning detection. So heat detectors in your skin respond to changes or harmful temperatures. They let you know when you need to change your environment. Taste, all those little bumps on your tongue are known as papillae, or taste buds. They determine bitter is the back portion of your tongue, sour is the sides of your tongue, and sweet and salty is the front of your tongue. And that's transmitting a chemical from one substance to your tongue, transmitting it to a neural impulse, and responding back, I like that, or don't ever do that again. All right. Smell, we call it the olfactory epithelium, which is the olfactory epithelium lines the roof of your nasal cavity, and it's sensitive and to detection of chemical stimuluses in the environment. Smell. Okay, you smell a flower, you take it in, there's actual chemicals coming off of that flower that are hitting that olfactory epithelium at the roof of your nasal cavity, and that's transmitting the environmental stimulus to your brain for interpretation, and then your brain makes a determination whether or not you like that particular stimulus. All right, please use this chapter, or this lecture rather, video to supplement your readings. This is certainly not everything you need to know, but this is a very good guide for what you'll need to know for this chapter, or at least the topics you'll need to know for this chapter for the exam. Great job, and take care.